Welcome to our first episode of our new series that we are calling Asili Ngamani, our collective return to nature, our core.
This is a kupika. Kuna kitunguu hapo. Hii ni ugali na chapati. They don't have to be afraid. I can smell on my mouth. This is for you.
Where is it? Here.
In our previous video, you got a glimpse of the Asili Ngamani quest, where we were all confronted with the question, who are we? Do we remember who we are?
Yes.
I seem to remember this.
Yes.
Past life.
Yes.
Do we know who we are? In today's episode, we continue with the quest to Ngamani. We take you on a drive on Kenyan roads to see exactly what's going on as we peel back the layers to understand how we even got here in the first place. We are returning to Ngamani, back to nature, back to the core, back to our roots. If that sounds interesting, let's get started. Good morning. It's not morning.
No, it's not.
It's what? It's evening.
Afternoon.
Hi, my lovely people, my lovely viewers. We are in Nairobi. We are in Kenya, and you know what's going to be happening. We're going to be bringing you content. And so right now we are here at, this is Nyayo Stadium, near Nyayo Stadium, Langata Road, and we actually are headed to Nanyuki. So it's 3 o'clock right now. We don't really know how far we'll go, but we don't want to drive in the night. We'll see if we're going to get there. Let's go. As we navigate our way to join our fellow motorists on Langata Road, it's easy to see why foreigners nickname Nairobi the walking city. There are countless men and women, boys and girls, walking with a sense of purpose and determination in their strides. To understand what the visitors of this city, especially those from the global north, mean when they say there are just so many people who are walking, you have to understand the reality of where they're coming from. Vienna, for one, the Austrian capital situated in the global north, however beautiful the city architecture looks, many people prefer to take the underground train, the fastest commuting option. People and the systems are strictly governed by the clock, and the rules are set to help utilize the limited time and resources effectively. There is public transport every turn and corner, and the next train is usually only 2 minutes away. There is literally nothing left to necessitate people to walk. It's the direct opposite here in Nairobi, the Kenyan capital situated in the global south. People and systems are governed not by the clock and rules, but by a collective consciousness and a sense of abundance of time and resources. So the roads have really changed. It's just been a year. The roads, the cows, I think the cows are still the same. Let me explain. public transport in Nairobi, for one, is privatized. This means that whilst in Vienna I pay 100 Kenyan shillings to cater for all my public transport uses for the day, here in Nairobi, 100 Kenyan shillings will only cater for one-way trip. I will need another 100 Kenyan shillings to make my way back home. Unlike in Vienna, here people don't live in the city center. They must commute a distance to and from the city. This means on average, a Nairobian will have to think about 200 Kenyan shillings for transport per day. Now, the majority of the people here are barely making 200 Kenyan shillings per day. And even if you made more than 200, there are no buses moving you from one corner of the city center to the other. Everything literally necessitates you to take a walk. This makes Nairobi a walking city. And that's not a problem. Because unlike in Vienna, people here are not on a race against time and resources. So we should go, how do we go so that we go to the highway? My goodness.
To the left.
Like this guy.
Yeah, left is always.
Okay, you said left. Secondly, if we are to consider the many health and environmental benefits of walking, it is a blessing in disguise. As a matter of fact, many European cities are now encouraging their residents to take more walks and use bicycles, especially for their health and that of the environment. Yeah, we shouldn't have come here. Speaking of cities, how did Nairobi evolve from being Enkara Nairobi, the place of cool waters, as named by the masses, to the capital city of Africa, of Kenya? Nyayo Stadium on your side. Yeah, I should have taken that other one. There was absolutely no reason to come here. But at the same time, I'm not sure how am I going to enter the expressway? This guy is like, Madam, let's go faster. Cities in Africa predate the colonial time and go way back, tens of thousands of years. The period that Europeans call the Dark Ages was only dark in Europe. At the time, Africa was thriving and prosperous in trade within her borders and with Indians, Chinese, Arabs, and believe it or not, with Native Americans. African cities developed organically from trading centers, as it is true of many towns and cities here in Kenya today. The economy of the African communities was founded on communal ownership of wealth and resources. It was driven by abundance. However, around this same time, a different economic system was at the verge of steep decline in the global north, the capitalist system. Capitalism is defined by IMF as an economic system in which private actors own and control property in accord with their interests. Business owners or capitalists employ workers or laborers who only receive wages and salary. The worker or the laborer does not own the means of production, but only uses them on behalf of the owner's capital. For some reason, I feel like I'm the only one who is on the third lane in this two-lane way.
We could be on Thika Road.
Yeah, we could be on Thika Road right now. We could be on our way to Murang'a. But what did I do?
We choose hard life.
I chose hard life because hard life is character development. Now, capitalism had accelerated industrialization in Europe faster than the resources, all to a crisis. If this capitalist would have solved the problem by questioning and re-examining the capitalist system, the world would probably be in a different place today. But they did not. They resorted to colonialism. colonizing the whole earth. But we're talking about Nairobi here. So the capitalist system was upon us. It was called the colonial system, set up from a basis of lack and depravity in the European economy. And unlike previous African communal system, this new system was driven by lack and greed. The capitalist system was now rooted in Kenya. Wow,
I think
like
this is
this
a
is-
whole highway, this is a Safari.
The Freedom Highway and the Safari. We cannot even reverse, we are
No.
stuck. My goodness. Let's relax the legs. The system at least amassed land and resources and pushed out indigenous people out of their homes into reserves. Labor was important and laborers needed to be produced through schooling of children and through movement to urban centers. The men who would have provided security physically and socially for their communities were now needed to work in the railway line, in the coffee farms, in the sisal industries, and in the construction of the city of Nairobi. The African communal system was now crashing, and the very fabric of the homestead, the nucleus of the society, was completely destroyed. The men left the villages and the homesteads to work in the city, and the women were left to care for what was remaining of the villages. This dynamically changed the spiritual and the social setup of the society. The women were no longer the breadwinners, and the men became domesticated.
Go.
Nairobi was initially a communal land that was accessible to neighboring communities, that is the Maasai, the Kikuyus, and the Akamba for cattle grazing. But remember that these were actually not tribes, as the British would later reduce them to. These were in fact nations in today's terminologies. The geographical size of Turkana, for instance, in Kenya is about the size of entire country of Austria. That's just to give us an idea of how big these places were in size. And we haven't even started talking about population. Because in population, again, if I would give a comparison with Austria, Kenya is 5 times more people living in Kenya than in Austria. So these were not tribes. Whatever the British called tribes, the Akamba people, that's not a tribe, that's a nation. The Kikuyus, that's a nation. The Turkanas, about 43 in total, were living in the land that is now called Kenya.
The word tribe is a political statement. It was actually deliberately introduced to give a connotation of primitive people, backward people, uncivilized people, disorganized people, people unable to govern themselves, to more or less justify colonization. When it becomes suggested to you long enough, you begin to interpret yourself the same way the power that wanted to colonize you wanted you to think, so that you could accept his process of colonization. But today, if you look at it different and you say, okay, these so-called tribes were nations. I call those nations, the so-called tribes, I call them micro-nations. Once we accept to lose our micronation status, once we lose that identity, I become a slave. And a slave has no confidence, he has no self-respect, because a slave is a person who has been denied the opportunity to be himself. A slave is a person who has been robbed. We need to accept ourselves as a micronation. We need to accept our identity of that micronation. We need to give ourselves self-confidence through that micronation, because that is what gives me identity. See, if I say I'm a Kikuyu, If I mention my name, anybody who knows Kikuyus will know that's a Kikuyu girl, all right. And if I say I'm a Kikuyu, they all know if they come from Kenya, which part of the country I come from. I see myself as coming from the Kikuyu micronation, and I'm working desperately to try to see if all the micronations in Kenya could work together. But I also want to encourage them to remain who they are and to bring their baggage to the table and all together try to create a new nation. But that new nation is going to have to be a mixture of what we all are. All trees in the forest are not the same. You have the diversity. And I think that if we do really believe in diversity of life in the forest, life in the seas, why should we be afraid of diversity among us humans? That is something we should be celebrating. In 1885, Britain and other powers decided that they would divide Africa and divide these nations into new nations. They lumped them together and they formed new nations, completely with a piece of paper and a pencil on a map.
What Britain did was something more important than the occupation of geography and the defeat of politics. What it did was destroyed the confidence of the Asian people and the African people. Who turned Africa into a dark continent? It is a question which I never have found an answer to. There is no more beautiful a continent than Africa, as anyone who comes here finds. But you had to convert it as an image of a barbaric continent which had to be relieved from its own culture, from its own history, from its own. Who created the term witch doctor? As if the medicine, which was a part of the cultural history or of the history of Africa, was part of witchcraft. We have been taught the language of subservience. We have been taught to hate ourselves. In order to create the other, in order to create a rationale for power and for empire building, you had to convert the Asian people and the African people into a slothful, backward burden upon the world, the white man's burden of Rudyard Kipling. Gandhi used to say it all the time, that long before you can defeat that white man who has come to defeat us, you have to find yourself again. You have to find your confidence and your courage again.
There is an ambivalence that African Christians have towards the missionary movement. There is no question at all that very many good things came with the missionaries. Many of us are educated today only because of the commitment of men and women from overseas who built schools and colleges and universities. Many of us are alive today because of the same commitment that they had to provide health services. They were also part of the imperial movement, the colonizing movement, and they came with the arrogance of the powerful. And so there is the story, it's not original to me, it's a story that has been told before, where they say, when the missionaries came, we had the land and they had the Bible. And they said, let us pray, and we dutifully shut our eyes, and when we said amen and opened our eyes, they had the land and we had the Bible.
Now looking back, I know and I appreciate now that when you grow up in a colonial system, or in whichever system you grow up, people who design that system design in such a way that they will produce a certain kind of people, because they give them a certain kind of information, they expose them to a certain kind of information, and they keep certain kind of information away from them. So you grow up with a certain attitude. You are shaped. Your mind, your attitude, your values are shaped. Your world is shaped. And you are deliberately discouraged to appreciate anything about you because you are not supposed to know or to imagine there was anything good in your pre-British experience. So your people in the pre-British era were primitive, they were backward, they didn't know anything, they did not even know anything about God. Now you know about God, you know about Jesus, you're saying the rosary. Remember, I was saying the rosary. All these things are packaged in such a way that you look at the British and you admire them greatly.
The name Nairobi comes from the Maasai expression Enkara Nairobi, meaning cool waters, referring to the cool stream flowing through the area. With the arrival of the Uganda Railway, the site was identified by a capitalist named George Whitehouse for a store depot, for a shunting ground, and for camping ground for the Indian laborers who had been brought to work on the railway from India. Whitehouse, the chief engineer of the railway, favored the site as an ideal resting place due to its high elevation of about 1,700 meters above the sea level, and its temperate climate, adequate water supply, and being situated just before the Limuru escarpments, close to the resources that was needed by the European economy. During the pre-colonial era, the people of modern Kenya mostly lived in open, expanse land amongst their national and cultural groups, where they had council of judges within their communities rather than one singular government or leader. By the onset of the European War of 1919, Nairobi was fully established as a European settler colony through immigration and land alienation. In 1919, Nairobi was declared a municipality. By 1921, Nairobi population grew with 50% being native Africans. The next decade would see a growth in native communities in Nairobi, and they began to constitute the majority for the first time. And as you would guess, the growing population posed a threat to the ruling colonial government. And like any government that has no interest in the people that it governs, in capitalist fashion and design, the government responded by restricting the lower class Indians and all the African natives to a specific quota for residence and trade, setting a precedent for racial segregation. The native Africans were angered by this segregation and the indignities shown to them on their own ancestral land. The natives organized themselves into unions as well as activating their armies. The green button, okay. So wacha nikaribie. It's my first time, so I don't know anything. Asante. And then, it's just open. Oh, okay. Thank you. My goodness. They used diplomacy and war simultaneously to take back control of their land. The Mau Mau uprising in the 1950s and the Lancaster House Conference initiated a transition to Kenya's independence in 1963. But this was not the same land that the British had found thriving as a communal economy, led by a council of judges and comprising of at least 40 nations. The Europeans handed over a capitalist economy to the few African elites who would now continue the colonial legacy, dubbed neocolonialism. And that's how we find ourselves where we are today. At the time of recording this video, Kenya is in the hands of a capitalist government. Ni how much? Hii country ya M-Pesa haina nini? Hii country ya M-Pesa hakuna ni kulipa tu na cash. Oh, inaanza next week? Oh. So ni hivyo ama kuna change? So it's for me to know how to get out.
We have to go here and then have to make a U-turn.
At some point. Where is that U-turn? Where is that U-turn? Oh, we've really come far. So we are going to Nanyuki, by the way, in case anyone is wondering.
If here is really a U-turn now in reality.
So we've been driving for, is it 4 hours already? We've been driving for 4 hours. We are arriving at Sagana shortly. At the time of recording this video, Kenya is in the hands of a capitalist government. The resources have dwindled. And the country is in literally its dark ages. The question is, will we examine this system? Will we question this system? And what is going to be the next move? Because the next move is going to determine the kind of future our children will find themselves in.
Sisi hatuna silaha, sisi tuko hivi. Na unaona hii kitu imerushwa, hata saa hii tumeshika moja hivi.
The president told the people when you were sworn in, you said that you want a strong opposition. And this is the time now the opposition is organized themselves to give you the strong, to show you the strong opposition. So the best thing you do is not using all this force.
Hakuna mtu amekuja kuleta vita. Hakuna toka asubuhi wapi mtu amepiga mwingine. Hakuna, lakini serikali ndio wanashindwa wakitupa matia gasi, hata wenye wale polisi wanatembea kwa mguu wanaumia, wanalia maji.
The country has lost almost 2 billion shillings in terms of business, and this is money that should have been circulating in the economy.
History has already taught us that capitalism is exploitative and destructive. The question is, what are we going to do today? We are arriving at Sagana shortly, and so we will not be able to make it to Nanyuki or Murang'a as we had thought. And we're looking forward to making more content here in Kenya. It's actually very exciting content that we have planned for you. So hit that subscribe button, like, share this video, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.